About 5 years ago, I was flat on my back. I was in constant pain. I had a lot of numbness and tingling. I couldn't sleep a lot at night, and even doing basic tasks like washing the dishes or driving, or even going to take out the trash, it was quite difficult for me. And I couldn't work anymore. So life as I knew it was over, and all my dreams of working hard and living a good life were kind of diminished by my illness. Because prior to that, I was an investment banker and hedge fund manager working in Hong Kong. I had a pretty good career. I moved to Brunei to start a new way of life. Lived in a nice house, drove nice cars, and everything seemed on the surface to be in order. And then my medical condition came, and I couldn't do a lot of things that I had hoped I would be able to do. And someone who like me, who spent all their time, either studying in school at the desk or using the computer at work. So being unable to sit at the desk, use a computer, or even clench my fist, or do pretty much everyday tasks was a real blow for me. So I couldn't really do anything externally. So what I could do was do a lot of research online, and I researched a lot of things on personality and personality development. So what I did then was to get a better understanding of who I was. I got into things like MBTI theory, and Enneagram theory. On top of that, I started working on my inner life. So much so that I was really interested in it. It was about 4 years ago. I was kind of understanding the Enneagram system a bit more. And I was living in Brunei. And so I moved from this small Islamic country in Brunei, where there was kind of peace and tranquility. And I moved all the way to California to do a teacher's training program in the Enneagram. So this is about 3 years ago. I was so intrigued with this system, which explained a lot of my life. It was something that held a lot of mystery for me, and I wanted to go into it a little bit more. So I spent time in California. We lived in these huts here, and in this retreat center in Menlo Park. And we were just spending time in the community, a small amount of us, studying the Enneagram day in and day out, learning to live with each other, learning to spend time studying the 9 types and getting to grips with all of them. So remember my medical condition. It was something known as fibromyalgia, and there is no cure for fibromyalgia. It's something that people can be debilitated by, and something which affects them for their whole life. So I was, one thing I learned though in California was that my medical condition was linked to something inside me, something that was affecting my emotions. And when I started to discover more about myself, I started to learn more about who I was, and in terms of my inner drive and motivations, I started to have a certain degree of freedom in the way I lived my life. And through doing so, just working with it and watching myself, kind of analyzing myself and analyzing my own thoughts and behavior patterns, I started to see that my health started to improve as I started to change my lifestyle. I started to get better incrementally. And so, I can stand before you here today and not flat on my back. Partially as all the different small tweaks I've done in my life. So yeah, I'm still in pretty much constant pain, but you can't really see it, and it's definitely a lot better than it used to be. So, what is the Enneagram? What is this mysterious personality development, ancient system, which you maybe heard a little bit about? So I'm going to bring you back to an ancient history. The first character I'd like to introduce you to is Vivarius Ponticus. He lived from 345 to 399 AD. And so what he was an ascetic, he was a hermit. He lived in these caves which you see before you today. So these caves are located in the desert of Nitria. They were actually where he went out from the desert, away from this city of Alexandria there, which was a center of a lot of knowledge, lots of mathematics, a center of places of where a lot of ideas were flowing in that day and age. And so he moved away to seek peace in the desert. And what happened in the desert, he lived in a community of other monks, and what they did was they talked to each other, something which, and in this busy city which we live in, you don't actually get to spend much time with each other. Everyone's rushing and being busy all the time. So here in the desert, he could spend time in talking with each other. He lived in a cave like what the ones you see here. And he figured out there were 9 different obstacles, 9 different things that faced people and different challenges. And he called them the 9 vices to virtue. So he wrote a piece about this. And he discovered that there were 9 different types of people, and they struggled with things such as envy, pride, gluttony, greed, laziness, anger, and so on. And he found out that these qualities were not good qualities to have. And in order for them to be a better person, they had to learn some of the higher qualities, some of the higher virtues, as he called them. And so he became known for was how to convert someone who is struggling with their internal life, and so that he could reach a higher level of understanding. And in doing so, there was he introduced the virtues. The virtues are then things as humility, serenity, peace, great qualities that people would have if they took the time to slow down and to understand themselves better. So he's pretty much one of the pioneers of what became known later in today as the Enneagram. And he's someone who was kind of the forerunner to the 7 deadly sins, which you probably heard of in the Christian circles. And the 7 deadly sins was instituted by a Pope Gregory I in around AD 590, about 200 years later. So he took these 9 different vices and he cut them a bit, and he came up with 7. And so these 7 deadly sins, such as sloth, envy, greed, and so on, became known in Western Europe and the circles there, and they spread throughout the world for centuries. So we're going to fast forward a little bit, because this Enneagram diagram was not something that came out of the desert. It was the invention of, one of the earliest records of it was from Ramon Lau, also a priest, a philosopher, and he's someone who came up with this diagram, the triangles. So he had 3 different triangles, and you put the 9 virtues on the outside of this diagram here in the top left, and he came up with this original, became known later as the original Enneagram, consisting of 3 equilateral triangles within a circle. And he put in the virtues on the outside, he put like God and love in the center of the circle. So this was one of the earliest forms of the diagram we have here today, around 1200 to 1300, 13th century. But what you see in a lot of textbooks is what was the work of George Gurdjieff, and he was someone who spent a lot of time traveling around the Middle East and Tibet. He spent time in the region of Egypt, where the Enneagram was originally devised by Evagrius Ponticus, and he came up with this system. He explained the system of movement. It was something that was used for dance, and he used this system, and he called it what's known now as the process Enneagram. And he used the law of 7, how people move around. He looked at a lot of the Sufi circles, and he saw how they danced, and it was a pattern and movement. And something that which he came up with, so you see the flow of on the bottom right, the 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, the law of 7, is slightly different from the original Enneagram. But what you see on the bottom right will be seen in a lot of Enneagram textbooks. So he did not actually come up with the Enneagram of personality. That was the work of Oscar Ichazo, born 1931. He was also a philosopher, he was a psychologist. He lived in Chile, and what he did, he also traveled around the world searching for truth and searching for a way. And what he did was to come up with his own passions and virtues, and he placed the 9 different kind of vices and virtues on the Enneagram diagram. and he put them in kind of correct order. So he attributed the 9 different types of people. Each person will struggle with one particular sin. So he took the 7 deadly sins. So you have, you got 1 is anger, 2 pride, 3 deceit, and they're very similar to what we have in blue, which is vaguenesses, vices to virtues, anger, pride, vainglory. He adapted them a little bit. He placed it on the diagram. So this is one of the key evolutions in the history of the Enneagram. As you can see, it's not the work of any single person. It's kind of evolved over the centuries. So it's not something that any single person devised. And he also had the higher qualities, the virtues on here. So perseverance, patience, humility, truthfulness. It's something which, when you work with the Enneagram, you can develop some of these higher qualities and virtues, which is the ultimate goal of it, personal transformation. So how did the Enneagram enter Western civilization? It's been pretty much used in Europe, in the Middle East, and South America. It was actually the work of Claudio Naranjo. He was studying in Esalen in California. He was also a psychologist. He was experienced in Gestalt studies. And he went over to Chile, just by chance. And he met Oscar Echazo. He learned the Enneagram of personality from him. He later then took this system and went back to California. And what he did, he adapted it. He tweaked it a little, and he used panels. He introduced panel methods. So what you see later tonight is a panel method on how people are going to use the Enneagram. We're going to interview a couple of panelists, and this is how the learning has been done since the 70s. So he brought this back to California. He used this method. He started to understand people a lot more. And my teacher here, Helen Palmer, learned it from him in 1970. And she was using the Enneagram for about 40 years. She wrote the book, The Enneagram. I went over to study under her about 3 years ago. She set up the Enneagram in the narrative tradition. The narrative tradition being the interview and panel method is a way in which sharing from someone's inner thoughts and motivations can be understood and then shared with the public. Another of my teachers, Dr. David Daniels, he was professor at psychiatry at Stanford University. He came across Helen in about 1988. They formed the Enneagram in the Narrative Tradition School, which is one of the largest Enneagram schools, and continued to work with him on that. Yes, so Dr. David Daniels, he introduced the more scientific approach to the Enneagram. He's, after all, a psychiatry professor, and he wrote the book, The Essential Enneagram, which is more of a scientific approach to the Enneagram. So together they founded the Enneagram in the Narrative Tradition School. They have run thousands of interviews, like the one you're going to see later today. It's just one of our samples. And they put their combined work together in the books which they have written. I'd also like to emphasize that the Enneagram is a moving system. So as I explained to you, it went all the way back to 300 AD, and they had some idea of people are different and people struggle with certain things, but they weren't able to capture it in the form you see today. So it's actually an evolutionary process. It started as an ancient origins, but it's been adapted over the years. And the work which I've learned from these couple of guys, I'm kind of adapting it as well, and as it goes along. So one of the things that David Daniels told me about, he said the Enneagram can change the world. And it's something that I took to heart, and it's something that I feel that is kind of a burden, and he passed it on to the next generation to carry the baton, to carry his life work on, to kind of understand people in a bit more depth than what they've done. So obviously very grateful to him. He passed away last year in his mid-80s, but he spent his whole of his later life working with the Enneagram, teaching a lot of people and training them to use it, and it still continues to evolve today. So this is basically the panel method which we use to be interviewed. So I'm being interviewed by Helen on the panel and Marion Gilbert on the left side. And Maren is someone who introduced me to the Enneagram somatic work. And sometimes she is actually a body therapist, she's a physiotherapist, she works with a lot with the body, and she introduced me to my own health was related, somatic condition was fibromyalgia was related to my inner work. So she's someone that combined the physical piece. So previously the Enneagram was more of a mental and emotional piece used by a lot of therapists. She brought in the physical part of the Enneagram, in the body center, to kind of bring in the concepts and ideas that we have to integrate with the mind, body and emotions. Okay, so how is the Enneagram used today? Quite basically, it's for personal understanding and personal growth. It helps you understand the question, who am I? Then next thing you realize is that people are different, and why am I different from you? So who are you? And why am I different from you? And another thing it's used for is, how do we get along? Part of it is this talk is on the interconnectedness of humanity, so we're going to understand a little bit in today's session how connected we are to each other, and how even though we're different, we may be similar in certain ways. And in that respect, it's one of the core and central ideas of the Enneagram, is how, you see from the diagram, is like everyone is connected along the circle through the lines in some shape or form. And we'll be exploring that later today.